Today we're going to deal with another mechanism. And then next week is I don't know, I think we have another class next week on the same from the same series because it's 7-part and yeah. And then we're gonna go into something else. I haven't finalized that, but probably it's gonna be prayer. I think it's time that we delve into that a little bit, into prayer. So we're in this 6th week of that series. We spoke about some of the mechanisms that sometimes cause us to do acts that end up as creating harm. The first one was when we confuse between desire and consent. Another one was the broken window theory. If it's already broken, it's not a big deal if I continue to break it. Another class was the permission, once the permission to exercise force, power is given, there's no mechanism that can limit it and to avoid accidents or the harm of innocent people. We spoke also about the default effect. If you remember, that was specifically one of the examples we spoke with in the context of organ donation. Sometimes it's just the default. And last week we talked about the autopilot mechanism. And we stop listening and paying attention to subtleties and little details, and sometimes bad things could happen. Which brings us to today. So I don't remember when was it. It was late, it was night, and we were coming from somewhere, Tila and I don't remember, maybe it was a wedding or something, I don't remember. Late at night, I think it was on the 405 or maybe the 10, I don't remember, one of them, probably the 405. Highways is practically wide open, no cars, super late, like, I don't know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. Nothing, no police, no nothing, whatever. All of a sudden, we're talking, and all of a sudden I noticed that like I'm already like in, I don't know, 70, 75. I'm driving pretty fast. And what's interesting was, not that I was speeding, what's interesting is that even though I was speeding, I'm not really passing other cars. It means that like the people around me were driving as fast as I was, or even faster than me. And so that means that pretty much everybody around me was speeding. Now, I'm going to assume that just like me, most people, most drivers, we consider ourselves as people who obey the law. That's the way I educate my kids. You know, you need to obey the law. However, under these conditions, in the night, whatever, somehow I allowed myself to break the law. So how that mechanism works? Why did I let myself do that? It's part of our series, why good people sometimes end up doing bad things. I'm not talking about like issues where I think that we're not talking about something that is immoral or something that is wrong, etc. It's just a simple law that usually I obey that law. And this mechanism has to do with understanding the essence or the rationale or the logic of the law. Or, let's be more accurate, that I think that I understand the rationale, the logic, the essence of the law. In other words, if this is something that I don't understand, there's a very good chance that I'm just going to keep the law. I'm going to obey the law simply the way it is. But if I think that I understand the logic behind that, well, then under certain circumstances, maybe things could be a little bit different. Where do I see it a lot? For example, in halacha. People call all the time and ask questions when it comes to kashrut, right? Kosher stuff, like, my spoon fell into this and whatever. Is that okay? I cut with this knife and whatever, all that kind of stuff. These are the questions that we get. How about questions about returning a lost object? Never got a question like that. Now, it's not because those people keep kosher to a greater extent that they, return a lost object, but no, I think that what's going on here, look, people, I see it all the time. There's like, plaques or whatever, lost puppy, whatever, all that kind of stuff. People will return. If they see the puppy, they will return, right? Or they see a sweater, or whatever, or something, especially with has a name on it or whatever, they'll do it. But I think that in that particular field, or that particular topic of Hashavat Aveda, returning a lost object, people say, well, I understand the rule, I understand the logic, I understand how it works, and therefore I can make a decision on my own. Okay, if it's $100 bill on the street, I understand that there's no, it's mine, right? There's no sign, there's no something that somebody can claim it or whatever. But if there's I don't know, a piece of jewelry that it has somebody's name on it, inscribed on it, or whatever, or something with somebody's, or a puppy with like, collar, and it has like the owner's info on it. What? A chip, whatever, it has the owner's info, whatever, that kind of stuff. Okay, so people say, okay, I understand the rationale here, and I can make my own decisions. But when it comes to kosher, it's not really always about logic, right? It's not really clear why, when you cut an onion, it's like cooking. You ask every chef, not Jewish, they'll tell you, I don't know what you're talking about. Onion is a vegetable, just like any other vegetable. What are you doing, right? So it's not always logic. Let's call it, it's the law of God, whatever that means, okay? And since I recognize the fact that I don't necessarily understand that or know all the details about that, and therefore I'm going to ask the rabbi. I'm going to follow the law the way it's written. If my milk teaspoon fell into my whatever. But if I understand the logic, I can be my own rabbi. I can perhaps even maintain the essence of the law with creating my own way of observance. And when I think about the laws of traffic, I say, well, okay, I don't know how I ended up with page 5 before page 2. There we go. No, that's 3, 7, 9. Yeah, I have like numbers here, but from some reason, I don't know. Okay, but when hopefully this is the right order. Hopefully, when I think about the laws of speeding or whatever, or traffic, I'm saying, okay, what's the purpose? What's the rationale here? It's to protect the life of others. It means that both I and other drivers need to get safely from whenever one place to the other. And then I can say to myself, well, if the road is clear and I can see well, and there are not a lot of cars, and it's late at night, and my car has no issues, it works fine, and what's the big deal if I'm going to speed? The car can handle it. Definitely 10, 15 mile per hour faster than what the law requires. I don't put myself nor others in danger. What's the big deal? And here I broke the law. Is it so terrible? I don't know. We can argue about that. But there's definitely a slippery slope here. Okay, so the idea is that if I understand the rationale, I can sometimes try to reason with that. But when I keep the law the way it's written, whether it's kashrut, whether it's other stuff, that I don't look into the details so much, the rationale or why it is like that, or all that. I just, okay, that's what the Torah says. Milk and meat, they're not going to go together. Then I just keep it. That's it. I don't try to, oh, that's because of, no. And this debate about the essence of the law is that mechanism that I want to talk about today. It sometimes causes people, good people, to break the law.
Did you get a ticket?
Nope. I didn't get a ticket. Because people say, maybe I don't keep the law, but I keep the essence of the law. I keep the rationale of the law. And we saw it, like, for example, very, very well in COVID. So in the first days of COVID, what, like, or whatever, first couple of months or month or whatever, when it was not clear what exactly, how contagious it is and what exactly happened. So when there was like, no, everybody shut down, everybody is home, that's it. We hardly like left the house. The more we understood, the more we learned about that, the more we gathered information, how it works, or at least we thought we understand how it works and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so all of a sudden we allowed ourselves to do more. Okay, so we can't get together. However, but if we're going to do it with a distance, then it's okay. Well, we can't be together, but if we're going to wear masks, then it's okay. Now, you can argue whether all those rules and all those restrictions were right and they were beneficial, whatever. That's not our discussion. So we didn't, at least the young people, didn't really keep the restrictions the way they were. written or told or whatever. It's the essence of the law. It's play day. They're in pod together in class anyway. So what's the big deal? Like, that kind of stuff. But this mechanism, at the end of the day, causes people to break the law, to break the boundaries. One person said, "Oh, if you're in the open air, you can't get it." And the other one's like, "Oh, the mask is gonna protect me." And the third one says, "Well, I already had it, so I can't get it again." And the fourth said, "Well, you're totally protected if it's davening or if you study Torah, then you can study in the chavruta because it's for Torah study. So you're protected by higher power." Bottom line is, everybody excluded themselves based on what was comfortable, relevant, made sense to them. And at the end of the day, there was a major breach in restrictions. Now, the Torah understands that mechanism very well. And the way the Torah describes the Ten Commandments in Parashat Yitro, and later on Parashat Yitchanan, kind of mirrors or reflects this fear of the Torah from this slippery slope, where people are going to start looking at the rationale, the logic behind the law, the meaning behind the law, and we're going to end up in a bad place. The first dibrot, the first 5, right? Remember, the right side, the left side. Looking if we have, no. The first 5, the last 5, right? So the first 5, the Torah doesn't only tell us what's the commandment, but also tells us the logic behind that. What's the essence behind the mitzvah? What's the implications? For example, the prohibition for avodah zarah, for idol worshiping. Torah doesn't say, "Lo ta'aseh lecha kol pesach b'chol tmuna." You should not fashion any images. Thank you. But also the Torah explains, "Ki anochi Hashem Elokecha Elkanah poked avon avot," etc., etc., etc. There's a reason behind that. It's not only what am I not allowed to do, but also why am I not allowed to do so. You got to be loyal to God because what? No. This is the God that took you out of Egypt. You got to be, yes, later on, right. Okay, now go, right, correct. You got to be loyal to God because otherwise you're going to be punished. Same goes for Shabbat. So the practical commandment, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. But the Torah also explains, Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim et haaretz, uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat vaynafash. So what is the essence? The meaning means that anyone that needs to rest, okay, everybody needs to rest, but the Torah also gives the reason behind that.
The Torah does not say that everybody needs to stay rest.
No, it didn't say because everybody needs it. No. The Torah says because God did that. Correct. We can get philosophical about that, but it's not because you need to rest. Because otherwise the logic, well, if I rested, if I just came back from a vacation, I was like a whole week of resting, then I don't need to keep Shabbat, right? No, that's not the way it works, right? But when the Torah talks about dibrot 6 to 10, then the Torah changes the language. It's very short, right? Okay, it's very short, very focused, and there's no explanations. Lo tirtzach, period. That's it. Lo tignov, period. No explanations. There's no argument, there's no reason, there's no essence, there's no logic, there's no none of that stuff. The ta'am, the reason of the mitzvah. There's a very clear commandment, and that's it. Why? Because if the Torah would start to explain, lo tirtzach, thou shalt not murder, because, well, the other person also have basic rights of living, then people can start arguing all sorts of crazy stuff. So the Torah diffuses that mechanism. In those mitzvot, it's following the rule. That's it. And this is how, by the way, the Rishonim explain it, that the first 5 mitzvot requires kavanah and understanding, focus, intent, understanding, passion. The last 5, no. Lo tirtzach, that's it. Whether you understand the logic, whether you don't understand the logic, it's out of the question. Lo tignov, I don't care if you understand that, if you agree to that, if you understand why, and blah, blah, blah. I don't really care. You're still. No, the Talmud might explain it, but it's not about. There's no prohibition to try to understand that. The question is is one connected to the other? And what the Torah is trying to say, no, whether you understand it or not is completely irrelevant. You just obey. Perhaps there's some sort of a requirement to understand something about Shabbat in order to observe it. So I can refrain from melacha, I can refrain from doing all the stuff or whatever. I need to keep Shabbat, but I need to know something about it. I need to understand, why am I doing that? Why am I not? And this is, by the way, that's the way we educate our kids, right? If we tell the kids, well, you can't do that on Shabbat because. So, okay, you can say muktzah. They don't know what that is, but whatever. But you try to explain to them, we don't do that on Shabbat. On Shabbat, we do things in a different way. That kind of depends on the age, obviously. But when it comes to lo tignov, it's like the classic, kacha. Because you don't need to explain that.
I have another question.
Yeah.
You are not allowed to eat meat with milk, right?
Right.
But what if the source of the milk is a fruit? Is it okay to eat?
Then it's not milk.
What?
It's not milk.
It's white and it's like a milk. They call it milk.
They call it milk. So what?
But it's almond milk, but it's
No, it's nothing. It's not. The Torah doesn't consider almond or whatever, oat, whatever, all that kind of stuff as milk. It's not milk. We call it milk. Okay, fine.
It looks like milk.
You can call whatever you want, but it's not milk. Like when the Torah talks about milk,
Milk
talks.
from the cup.
Okay. Now, and Chazal actually deal with that. In Parashat HaMelech, for example, in Sefer Dvarim, the Torah says, "Lo yarbe lo susim velo yashiv et ha'am Mitzrayma velo yarbe lo nashim velo yasur levavo." The king is not allowed to have too many horses, and the king cannot take the people back to Egypt, and the king cannot have too many wives. And the classic interpretation, and it says, like at the end, lo yasur levavo, so his heart is not going to be, whatever you want to call it, turn away. And the classic interpretation kind of looked at it as an explanation, meaning, why can't he have too many horses? So he's not going to take the people back to Egypt. Why can't he have too many wives? Because otherwise they're going to turn his heart. That's the classic interpretation. But what happens with the king that says, well, it's not applicable to me. I can have a lot of women. I can make sure that my heart is not going to turn away. Which is exactly the same mechanism of the same person shall, that drove 70 miles per hour on the 405 in the middle of the night.
Same person that opened the data. So
Yes, but we'll get to that in a second. It's the same mechanism because I can be cautious. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to get into an accident. I'm awake. There's plenty of light. My car is fine. There's nobody around. There's no problem with that. It's the same mechanism. I'm not going to put anyone at risk. I'm going to have a lot of horses, but I'm going to make sure that people are not going to go into Egypt. And the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin brings the words of Rabbi Yitzchak. ואמר רבי יצחק, מפני מה לא נתגלו טעמי תורה? Why did the Torah give us the reasons behind the laws? Not always. שהרי שתי מקראות נתגלו טעמן ונכשל בהם גדול העולם. Two commandments or two places that the Torah actually gave us the rationale behind it, and Gdol HaOlam, the wisest man, Solomon, failed. Ktiv, and he talks about our psukim, Lo yarbe lo nashim, shouldn't have too many wives. Amar Shlomo, Ani arbe velo asur. It's not going to happen to me. Shlomo said, I will add many, but I will not turn away. Uchtiv, vayhi le'ed ziknat Shlomo, nashav hitu et levavo. We have a pasuk in Sefer Melachim that says, for it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. Uchtiv, and the next one, Lo yarbelu susim, right? The king, he shall not accumulate many horses for himself. Ve'amar Shlomo, ani arbe velo ashiv. And Solomon said, I will accumulate many, but I will not return, meaning back to Egypt. Uchtiv, ותצא מרכבה ממצרים בשש, and it is written, and a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, the Torah doesn't tell us the reason, the rationale behind, because when it does, the boundaries are going to be broken. People start to make the cheshbon. People start to look into the rationale. People, and Gdol HaOlam, the wisest person on earth, Shlomo HaMelech, he didn't mean that his heart is going to turn. He didn't mean that that stuff is going to happen. But it happened. Why? Because the ability to maintain the law, to keep the meaning of the law without the law itself, it dissolves in the long run. It dissolves. You can't do that. Just the meaning, the rationale, the essence. Without the law itself, it's not going to last. If it would be possible to make a whole reasoning behind Lo Tirtzach, I don't want to think how much blood would have been shed. Similar idea we find in Masechet Shabbat, and that's from the Mishnah that we say every Friday night. Every Friday night before Mariv, at least in Nusach Ashkenaz, we learn the Mishnah of Masechet Shabbat, and it says the following: Lo yikra le'or haner shema yateh. On Shabbat, one is not allowed to read using an oil lamp. Why? Shema yateh, because we are afraid that you're going to tilt the lamp. Why? Because what happens is you read, and it's a good book, and you're going to see that the oil is almost finished or whatever. So what do you want to do? You're going to tilt it. So the little bit of oil that's still there in the lamp is going to get to the wick. And this is something that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. It's melechet mav'ir. This is considered to be like kindling a light on Shabbat. This is a prohibition on a Torah level. So comes the Mishnah and says, don't put yourself in that situation. You're gonna read using that light, because there is a chance, not because you want to do, because you want to violate Shabbat. You just like in the middle of the chapter, and it's like you have like 2 more pages, and it's like really, really good. I had that discussion last night with my daughter. It's like, I just need 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I'm like, it's the I gave her. Listen, at least she reads. So, but the Mishnah says, don't put yourself in that position, because you might fail. You might actually break Shabbat.
So what about Agita Boyo Mambala?
So what?
Agita Boyo Mambala.
Do it in a permissible way. Do it in a permissible way. One that doesn't come. Well, what about I don't know, sending your kids to a Jewish day school that costs tons of money. Oh, you can't afford it, so go and steal. No. The fact that I have one principle doesn't mean that I can violate a different principle. Anyway, and then the Torah, and then the Gemara tells the story. Amar Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha, Ani ekra velo ateh. Right? In Yiddish, we call those people, just like the same idea of Shlomo Melech. I'm going to read. I am a great rabbi. I can handle it. I'm going to read. I'm not going to fail. I'm not going to tilt the oil lamp. Pa'am achat kara uvikesh lehatot. One time he was reading, and I guess the hand was already going to do that, and he stopped himself in the last second. Amar, kama gdolim divrei chachamim shehayu omrim lo ikra leor haner. How great are the words of the sages that prohibited us even of being in that situation. He thought, I can do it. I can maintain the rationale of the law without the law. In other words, I know it's the idea is the prohibition of Shabbat. I'm not going to do that. There's no problem of reading on Shabbat. There's no problem of, using that particular type of light on Shabbat. On the contrary, we have an obligation to light nerot in the beginning of Shabbat, right? So I know what's the issue. The issue is like the fear that I'm going to break Shabbat. No, I'm not going to break Shabbat. It's not a problem. But that is something, a mechanism that we all think about all the time. Interesting, kind of like a little bit of a drash on what Rabbi Ishmael says, that the simple understanding is that Rabbi Ishmael says how good it is that the Chachamim put a fence around that prohibition, right? It's permissible to read, it's permissible to have that light, but they put a fence and they said, don't read using that light. Because, right? Maybe. But perhaps there's another interpretation. It says, Kama gdolim divrei chachamim shamru lo ikra leor haner, period. Unlike the other classic explanation that says, Shema yateh, here, there's no reason. Because what he's, right? In the Mishnah, it says Shema Yateh. But when he repeats that, he says, how great are the words of the Chachamim, Shayu Omrim, Lo yikra leor haner. One should not read leor haner using the light of the candle. Period. It doesn't put shema yateh. It doesn't add that addition, the rationale from the Mishnah. They said it's good. They didn't need to give the reason. Sometimes giving the reason creates a problem. So the Ten Commandments teach us that this principle that sometimes there are certain prohibitions. If we want them, we want that we don't explain them. Explaining the law, not always, sometimes, in certain cases, cause people to look. If every law was like that, then we're going to have a problem. A lot of times, oh, this is why, we keep Shabbat. Okay, it's a nice thing. Maybe I'll do it. Oh, this is why we do this. Oh, okay. Okay, so it helps in the observance of the law, both civil law and religious law. But sometimes it creates a problem. There's a law, it's an unwritten law that you buy a birthday gift, you do something for a loved one, right? But it has no meaning if that person comes from a different culture that doesn't understand that, right? Doesn't understand the meaning behind that. But the law of do not, you can't murder, you can't steal. You need to fulfill just the way it is. So this mechanism that where we always start to rationalize and understand and all that kind of stuff and okay, I can speed. It's a mechanism that sometimes can cause us to do bad things. And sometimes, it's lo tirtzach, period, lo tignov, period. Mitzvot has te'amim, has reasons, rationale behind us. But sometimes it's not. It's actually creates a problem. Now, correct, but it's still, the Rambam doesn't say that, oh, thou shall not kill because the other person has the right to live. He gives a reason for the mitzvot, even the mitzvot that the Torah doesn't explain, where it helps you to get connected to the mitzvah itself. But in certain areas, you just need to keep the law the way it is without getting into. Correct. Well, chok is actually defined as something that has no reason. I'm talking about things that, yes, the reason. We understand why you cannot kill, we cannot steal, but you don't need the rationale. Understand that there is a rationale behind that, but we don't use it in order to follow the law, unlike perhaps Shabbat, or even I would argue kosher and stuff like that. It's not. But in that sense, it's okay. Common sense, you said. Other cultures do that. Correct. Correct.
Why the Torah and the Decalogue was revolutionary.
The flip side of that, by the way, sometimes, and these are like a lot of, when people come to me, for example, for questions, and it's the flip side, when people like do things and it's like, so do you understand even why? And it's like, oh, And then I said, okay, let's understand what we're doing, and based on that, we kind of find the solution for that issue. I remember like one night I got a call from somebody. Like, I can't, like, we can't, like, light the Hanukkah candles. I'm running out of candles. I don't have enough for everybody and all that kind of stuff. And I said, what's up? You have one candle? She said, yeah, I have like 7. I said, you fulfilled the mitzvah with 1. You don't. So sometimes we're like, we don't ask those questions. That's the flip side of that, right? I always believe that if we taught the theology of Shabbat, we'd have more people who observe Shabbat. The idea behind that, like, Torah talks about, the Torah talks about this idea of Isur Melacha, right? The prohibition of Melachot, creative works, and all that kind of stuff, and God rested in the 7th. Okay, but how that relates to me, just because the Torah said so, then it's not enough. But if you understand the rationale, like the whole pedagogical idea here, for example, you supposed to follow God's ways. So if God rested on Shabbat, we need to do that. Fine. What's the essence of a creative work of melacha? Well, you create it. It's not about effort. It's not about effort. I can move like a very heavy table from one room to the other. That's not a problem on Shabbat. That's not prohibited. Actually, if you have a lot of guests, it's a mitzvah. But flipping the light switch, which does not require an effort, is a melacha. So it's not about an effort. It's about creating something new. Oh, the table was here, now it's there. There's nothing new here. But it was dark, now there's light. That's something new. I changed the reality. Right? Why? Because I'm creating something. I'm creating light.
Yeah.
Dark, now it's light. Okay? So, and the other thing is intent. If I did something and it just happened, like whatever, I didn't have the intent. I did A, but because of A, B happened, then I'm not liable on Shabbat. It's only if I wanted to do that. So what does it tell you? It tells you that you need intent and you need to create something new. What is that? That's following God's ways. That's what God did in the first 6 days. God created something new every day. God wanted to do that. This is why it happened. Okay? So now I understand. It's not about like refraining for something that might get me tired, because I can walk from here until whatever. That's totally fine on Shabbat. I'm not violating any law, right? It's not about my physical effort. It's about creating something new. I'm not talking about that issue. I'm saying, assuming that you're within the tchum. Okay? Now you can take it another step. So why can't I fix things, or why can't I do things like on Shabbat? Well, what's the problem here? Like from a philosophical idea. Well, it's recognizing God stopped on Shabbat. He didn't do anything creative. I'm not going to do something also. It's one aspect is I'm following God's ways, but what's the other? The other is I'm recognizing my limitations. Oh, that means I'm stuck. Let's assume I didn't prepare something. I didn't do anything. I'm stuck on Shabbat. I'll have to improvise. I'll have to whatever. I'm going to go to the neighbors. I don't know, whatever, something else. But the fact that I cannot do that, and I say that this is the law and I'm going to follow the law, I'm not going to violate Shabbat, it forces me to what? To recognize my limitations. If I'm not going to recognize my limitations, I might start thinking, oh, I'm like, I create a whole week. That's what God did. I create the whole time. No. So there's a whole philosophical, books were written about that stuff, and we'll try to crunch it into a second. But the idea, so the rationale or the essence or the meaning behind the law is important for us in order to be able to obey the law. But sometimes that same mechanism can cause us to break the law as well. So we need to understand the rationale behind that, but we need to sometimes also say, yeah, it's clear, it's night, no cars, I can go faster, I can speed, but it's still the law, and I'm not going to break it. And if we can stop at that second and say to ourselves, even though I understand the rationale, I understand the conditions, I understand all that kind of stuff, and yet I'm not going to break the law because that's the law, then maybe we have a better chance in avoiding situations where bad things happen. Shlomo HaMelech himself failed. Could happen to all of us.
When you realize you were going too fast.
Yeah.
you slow down.